Hey, greetings everyone, and welcome to episode 40 of Lines on a Page. I know what you're thinking. It's not Sunday, it's Saturday. And you're right. So, a long story short, so my special guest for today is actually supposed to be Reed Beeman. However, because of a noble cause, apparently there was a dog that looked like it had been hit or something, and so he took it to the vet. So that's where he's currently at right now, and hopefully we'll be able to pop in at some point during this. So, flying solo, at least for the moment. So, all that being said, welcome to Lines on the Page, episode 40. We're going to do some quick housekeeping stuff. Hit the comics located at 1871 Slaughter Road, Suite F in Massa, Alabama, which, by the way, if you happen to have any comics whatsoever that you are wanting to sell, please stop by the store on Saturdays and talk to the owner, Josh Olive, who is also one of the main hosts for Shop Talk. He will more likely would love to see your collection. And all that being said, please remember to like and subscribe. And also, if you want to figure out where you can find me on social media, you can go through the link tree, tpriceartworks, or if you look at this part right here, it says at tpriceartworks, and you can also find me that way through social media. So, all that being said, we're going to get into a really interesting topic right now, which is basically inspiration, influences, and how to use them in comics. And this is a topic I was really hoping that I could try to skirt around or whatever, but as time keeps on passing and more things become difficult within a range of visual artists in every medium, it would be hard for me not to. And I understand that there is a bit of a glare over here, and that's just because I just happen to be in the workspace of my home, and this is also where the best lighting is at the house because it's a north-facing window. So, first things first, inspiration and influences. Are they one the same? Does one cause the other to exist? And part of me wants to say yes to both of them. It might not always be the case for every single person for whatever it is that they want to do. But without an influence or influences, can inspiration still exist on its own without it? And it's kind of hard for that to even be possible because everyone has influences of something, whether it's, the way that they cook their meals, the way that they like writing, drawing, even playing an instrument. Everyone has a specific influence or someone or something that has caused them to want to get into a hobby of some sort or even art as a career. Um, so in my case, it's actually kind of a twofold situation. On the visual art kind of side, it's a bit of a strange occurrence, but it was really mostly me as a child not really understanding the concept of video rentals, even though that was the thing in late 80s, early 90s. But in my mind, the fact of we rent something only to have to return it back, it was just this cause of having to record what I was seeing visually onto paper and didn't realize that in some ways, I think my mom was kind of the progenitor of, I guess, the spark of influence to get into comics, just because she would always fold paper in half and have it set up for me almost kind of like a comic. And I believe I've got one or two of those still left somewhere in one of these closets, but it's there. And then, of course, on the art side of things, sorry, not the art side, the music side of things, that part comes from my brother. And most of that was just him playing music all the time. And I didn't realize that what I was listening to was prog rock, courtesy of bands like Yes and Genesis, Emerson Lake Palmer, and of course a lot of other stuff as well. And thank you. I like this too. I was actually kind of happy that I grabbed this a couple of years ago. Hope you're doing well, Jay. So yeah, it's just without these influences coexisting in certain parts of my life, the inspiration of wanting to do things creatively probably would not have existed until much later. Um, and then, there could also be some sort of weird alternate timeline where I may not have done anything creatively at all throughout the entirety of my life. And that's a bit of a shuddering thought. So, it is one of those things where we do have to figure out as artists in terms of the things that we are letting ourselves be influenced by to create the inspiration for our works. And of course, I know there has been a history within, not just within the visual art side, but also in the audible side. So that's everything from music to poetry, prose, that you've got people that decide that, oh hey, well, the only way that I can be inspired is substance abuse, and which, not saying that you can't do that, but at the end of the day, it's not, it doesn't really help you. So now this is a PSA for me to say, don't do stupid things, because stupid results will happen. But what you consider to be the influence for what you're trying to get into creatively that will inspire you later on should be something that's fulfilling, something that is going to help cause other people to want to be inspired by it as well, and for that process to continue on rolling. And at some points, people do end up getting lost, and they don't understand, or they just don't even think about those things. And so you've got, selfish decisions that end up happening in the works. And of course, throughout the history of Western comics, that's obviously been something that pops up every now and then. Sometimes a little bit more to the forefront than others, but it does exist. So when we get into the topic of like influences that inspire, so not to shine a giant spotlight on me, this is usually the part where I would have hit the question over the read. But there are a smorgasbord of influences that have dictated things and how I'm trying to put things together to do what I'm doing now. And sometimes it is pretty evolving. So while there are, the Western influences, which kind of hard on sleeve about, so, Adam Hughes, Terry Dodson, Frank Cho, Frank Frazetta, even some fine art people, such as MC Escher and Renoir. If I don't want to say Gustave Doré, but at sometimes I do want to say Gustave Doré. Although Len Decker and Norman Rockwell are pretty obvious, and of course, Bob Ross, which is not the reason of the influence of creating this channel before someone makes that joke. But those guys within the Western side of the world of art, even in comics, they all have individual things within that pattern, the DNA, that has caused my mind to start clicking and thinking about how to do things differently. And of course, you've also got other people like Mike Mignola, James Herron, Dana Warren Johnson, Stuart Eminem, even Pepe Larraz, that have been or are now doing things that I just didn't even think about. As far as as the saying goes, there's more than one way to skin a cat. So in the case of comics, there's more than one way to do comic art, uh, and sometimes you just need to set the bar higher. Um, And this was something that was actually talked about in a separate YouTube channel called the Ink Pulp Podcast, and it's between two different artists in the industry. And of course, um, it's Eric and I forgot what the other guy's name is, but every now and then they have Mateo Scalera be a part of it as well. Um, but this is a particular episode that Mateus was not in, which I kind of wish that he was. But they had talked about um, comic art as of within the last decade and where the bar should be set at, which I thought was an interesting thing because they had mentioned Pepe Larraz. And so when you think about like Flash of Tiles and stuff like that, when you got guys like Pepe Larraz, Jorge Jimenez, Manuel Desrar, RB Silva, um, all those guys have been setting the bar consistently high in terms of their interior art. Not their, I mean, yes, they do fantastic covers, but their interior art has been always top tier. Um, and the crazy part is that all those guys are not from America whatsoever. And it's really interesting to see all these European creators that have been hired consistently by the big two, and all of them, in some way or form or fashion, if they weren't influenced by Stuart Eminem, then they were definitely influenced by anime or manga or both, depending on which thing that they just visually happen to have latched onto. Which also coincidentally, through another YouTube channel called Comic Tropes, there's actually a video that just dropped today about Jeff Darrow, who, if you don't know who Jeff Darrow is, he is one of those guys that American, who put other comic artists to shame with the amount of detail that he can put in a double page spread. And it's absolutely bonkers. It's almost like playing Where's Waldo, but within a comic, because he does hide things in plain sight. And I've always thought that that was a really interesting thing. And I had no idea that he was the creator behind Big Guy and Rusty the Boy Robot, which is a 90s cartoon. But beforehand, it was actually a comic that was done. Darrow was doing art. Frank Miller wrote the story. And I had no idea that that was like an actual comic. I just knew it as a cartoon. And what made it even more interesting was the fact of Darrow's massive influence of manga and anime, because he actually did live in Tokyo for a time during the 80s. And while at the same time, he was also extremely influenced by the French comic artist Mobius, who, again, has also influenced so many artists over the decades. Probably, aside from Jeff Darrow, the only other person I can think of that has really inspired recent comic artists, I could think of Frank Cho, as far as just the clean arts, clean line work, basically. He's definitely influenced Travis Charest in terms of the amount of detail that you can put into a piece. And obviously he has influenced Jeff Darrow. So it's interesting to see how all these things have just kind of like interwoven and interconnected themselves in terms of how they dictate an artist's style. And what's weird is that there will always be that one comic artist that will just straight up mention a artist of some sort as their influence, And it just doesn't even click as to, well, how, because it's two drastically different things. But then once they explain as to why, and you start to actually analyzing, you start to look into it, then you start to understand, oh, hey, yeah, that actually does make sense. So as weird as it sounds, sorry guys, I had some notifications pop up on my phone and it's right here. Music has influenced me and inspired me in terms of my visual art, and sometimes it's dictated the way that I do either a specific pose or line work or the pacing of a page. Um, and what's weird is that I never really thought about that until a couple of years ago during the shutdown. And I had realized that some of the stuff that I'd been listening to on repeat, or specific songs that I compile together in playlists, really does dictate the way that I do my artwork. And some of it is on a rhythmic standpoint, usually between 130 to 180 BPM. It seems to be a consistent point. And at the same time, I'm also listening to a lot of things that are not just music with lyrics, obviously music without it. So instrumental, if you want to look at it from that perspective. Music that could be labeled as escapism, whether it's contemporary or classical, and even music that moves and shifts, whether it's changing time signatures, meter changes, even genres within a singular song. And it just kind of keeps my mind moving and thinking, so I'm not stuck on a particular thing every single time. So much so that my drawing playlist, which also doubles as my solo road trip playlist, so it keeps me engaged whenever I'm driving long trips. And yes, it is 14 hours long. That entire playlist is definitely something that I will repeatedly just put on shuffle because it just helps me, keep me on my toes a bit. And I just let Spotify do its thing. There's only been maybe a couple of times where it actually did play the same song twice in a row, and I didn't even realize it. And I think that's just something hinky with the Spotify algorithm. So, got my eyes on you, Spotify. So yeah, it's definitely interesting to see those things and how it parallels itself. Which, since I did mention a lot of the Western influences on my side, which I really didn't also state that there are a few other artists. So if you watch my Calvin and Hobbes show, I did mention Bill Watterson has definitely been an influence on me. Even though it doesn't show in my work, he is an influence and he does inspire me because if you just read, any Calvin and Hobbes comic, it's hard for me to believe someone isn't inspired to want to pick up a pencil and do something as fun and carefree as Calvin and Hobbes. Even if it's not a syndicate comic and it causes someone to want to pick up a pencil and do something. It's definitely there, and he is just as much of an influence on that as Will Eisner and what he did with the Spirit. Even though it doesn't really show in my work, Eisner's stuff has definitely caused me to think about comics differently in ways of approaching it. I haven't read enough of Mobius's stuff to really make a set-defining thing in terms of whether or not he inspires me or not. But there are some things that he does as far as establishing shots that are very inspiring and has caused me to make my gears turn. I forgot the name of the artist, but he has done a comic called Black Sad, which, if you are over the age of 18 and you want to read a very gritty crime noir set in like a Zootopia type America, highly recommend Black Sad. That comic has definitely made me think of things differently in terms of the way that you can take something as cartoony as a very, like I said, very Zootopia type world. But the watercolors in that are just fantastic. And it makes me think about rendering stuff in black and white differently whenever I see it. And so whenever we're also looking at into the world of, say, manga and anime, I actually did have to write a list. Now, the first three that I can basically just say straight off the list, Kentaro Miura, who created Berserk, Keshishiro Otomo, who did Akira, and Shiro Masamune, who did Ghost in the Shell, as well as Appleseed, Black Magic, Orion, and a few others. Dominion, Tank Police. That's the other one that he did during the 80s. Those three are pretty obvious, which anyone from my generation that was definitely influenced by that era of anime and manga, you can probably more likely see it in the work. Perfect example would be Daniel Warren Johnson, who absolutely loves all three of those guys, and just as much as he does Hayao Miyazaki, which I will say I probably have watched more of his movies and have been inspired by the music of that and the backgrounds more than the actual content itself. However, I do own the first volume of Nausicaa, which is beautiful to look at, but I haven't bought the rest of them, so I can't really tell. I know that there are some variations as far as the adaptation between the manga and the anime, but there seem to be some consistencies between the two. And just got a message from Reed. It looks like he's finally heading back home from the vet, so that's good. Hope everything's a-okay with that dog. So there's a few others that I'm going to list down here in terms of influences from the manga and anime side. First up is Naoki Urasawa, who has done two of my favorite manga series that I've read within the last couple of years. First one is Monster, which, if you love psychological thrillers like Silence of the Lambs or Seven, even The Fugitive, perfect thing to read. And then, of course, on the more sci-fi side of things, he also did one called 20th Century Boys, which I have not finished reading all of them. In fact, I didn't even realize that it went into like 9 volumes or so, and each volume is about that thick. So a lot of content for me to digest all at once. There is a bit of a psychological thriller twist to it all, but it is absolutely fantastic. And one of the things that Urasawa does that floors me to this day, and it's an education every single time that I pick up his books and read it, is how he renders old people. And he brings them to life. You can see every wrinkle and the way the crow's feet are done and all that sort of stuff. It's not in a weird way like how Frank Quietly does rendering of skin. It has a cartooniness to it, but it's also so well done. And I can't say enough good things about it. Next up is Hiromu Akawa, who did Full Metal Alchemist. She is one of a few female mangaka, which is the term for manga artists, who are also the writers of their same stuff that they're drawing. And Full Metal Alchemist is just one of those pieces of shonen that stands on its own. And I hate the fact that whenever it finally reached stateside, basically, at the same time that that happened, we were also getting bombarded with One Piece and Bleach and Death Note and a couple of others. And I was just getting bombarded by the... It's hard to call them otaku. So I guess the real terminology for them would be the weebs. It was just getting bombarded by them, and it really turned me off from wanting to read Full Metal Alchemist. So it wasn't until years later, after the series had been out and the first movie had already had dropped, which is the Knights of Shambhala, that I finally started Full Metal Alchemist. And I hate the fact that I missed out on that, because it really is a great piece of, and heavy piece of, not just the artistry, but also the story. It definitely causes people to think about stuff differently. And yes, so here's the thing. Brotherhood is basically just a readaptation of the original Full Metal Alchemist. And Brotherhood actually includes a lot of context and stuff that was actually omitted from the original Full Metal Alchemist. They did the same thing with Hellsing Ultimate, which I will say I've only read the first volume of Hellsing, so I can't really put two and two together. But that's the reason why Hellsing Ultimate exists. It's because Ultimate was basically in the same vein that Full Metal has Brotherhood. Ultimate is basically content that was omitted that they put back in with updated animation. So that's the reason behind that. And guys, hold on. I need to resend this email to read. So, but yes, Full Metal Alchemist was always done by Arakawa, and I've only read a few interviews done by her. The only other person that has done, which obviously she has done an impressive amount of work in her career, and has been doing it, as far as I know, has been doing it longer than Arakawa, is she did My Senekiku, Inuyasha. I'm about to look up her name because that is driving me up the wall. Rumiko Takahashi. I knew it started with an R. Which I will say that with Takahashi stuff, even though the Inuyasha is definitely a little bit more on the shonen side of things, she's really a shoujo creator, and is always really big into romantic comedies. And you can definitely see that in all of her work, but it doesn't mean that Inuyasha is any less than all the rest of her works, because they're all fun. And I really like that. So Full Metal Alchemist, in terms of just something different, something that definitely innovates a lot of ideas and stuff that you really don't see in modern shonen. And I love that about that. So we're going to get into some more classic people. So Yukito Kishiro, who did Battle Angel Alita. Funny enough, I hate the fact that the James Cameron live action adaptation of it was basically crapped on by supposed critics, but it was pretty faithful to the source material. And I hate that it just got so bombed on. And I personally prefer that over sci-fi Pocahontas, aka Avatar, even though it should not be called that. I definitely prefer that live adaptation of Lita over some of the more recent stuff that he's done, which that's not dissing, what he put out with Aliens or Terminator, because he obviously did those quite well, and they are staples within cinema history. But if you ever get a chance to watch Battle Angel Alita, either the 90s OVA, which I think is only maybe 3 episodes, or the James Cameron live action, definitely recommend. Ryuichi Ikegami. He is what I would consider to be, which him and also Takahiro Inoue, who did Vagabond, both Ikegami and Inoue are, I'm going to call them the Adam Hughes and Frank Cho of the manga world. What they do basically excels past, I guess, the conventional stuff regarding manga, and it definitely gets into almost fine art territory. So Ikegami is notorious for just creating these almost, I wouldn't necessarily call it realistic in terms of how he draws people, but it's definitely into that territory of likeness. He does rendering a certain way that is just almost like he's painting, but you can definitely tell that there's obvious line work, whereas with Inoue, when he does Vagabond, it's all brush. And in fact, if I have watched that documentary correctly, all the stuff that he's done for Vagabond is all done with brush. I don't think there's any actual no nib pens, no G pens or anything like that. So, which is mind blowing. But again, some of the stuff that they do is just absolutely beautiful. Which the scroll back, Ikegami has done Crying Freeman, which is kind of like Jason Bourne. My the Psychic Girl, which is a really interesting sci-fi tale. And he's done a couple of other stuff, like Lady Snowblood. Well, he's one of several artists who did that. There's a couple of others. And he also did the covers for the the Spider-Man manga from like way back, which, if I remember correctly, ended up getting reprinted by Marvel at some point in the 90s. So if you happen to see those covers, that is Ikegami's work. But I feel like that's just like the tip of the iceberg compared to the stuff that he's done. Scrolling a little bit further, Akihiro Yamada, which I am actually deep diving his work in this. His work is a rarity with this, simply because it's almost like if, and this is really bold of me to say, but it's almost like he's kind of like the John Mishima of artists in the manga realm. It's just the way that he renders stuff, the way that he really focuses on the contrast in the line art. Which of course it is a fantasy, so it does fall into that realm of category. But the stuff that he's done with Record of Lodoss War is just beautiful. I can't really say enough good things about it, and I hope that some of that influence will rub off on me for whenever I do this next prompt, which is coming up soon. And this is a perfect time for me to drop this in here. So on September 25th through the 30th, I'll be dropping down my prompt for Requiem Reverie. I can't speak. Requiem and Reverie. It's going to be my first prompt in a couple of months, and also my first one in October that I've done since maybe 2017. It's all original artwork, and I will be doing a video talking a lot more about that, hopefully tomorrow before I drop it. The prompt that is online. So if you are following me on Instagram or you're following me on Facebook, that is where the prompts will be. And all the rules and how that operates will be there. Water break. All right, so into more of the classic stuff. Kazushi Hagiwara, who did Bastard, which is a heavy metal fantasy, which weirdly enough has gotten a recent adaptation on Netflix. I haven't watched it yet, so I can't tell you if it's better or worse than the original one, the OVA that dropped during the 90s. But reading it, it's definitely a treat. I would definitely say it's one of those where it's definitely better read than it is watched in comparison to, like, say, Ghost in the Shell. I know a lot of people really talk about the original anime, so on and so forth, which also the same people have never watched the sequel called Innocence. But reading Ghost in the Shell is a tour de force compared to actually watching it. Not saying that the animation of Ghost in the Shell isn't good. It's excellent for the time period. It still holds up. But reading it is a whole other beast. And so the same thing with Bastard. It's definitely one of those where it's definitely better read than it is watched. And there are some arguments about that with Berserk. I will definitely say that the 2016 series that's focusing on the Black Swordsman arc into the Tower of Conviction arc was horrendous. And I'm not saying that biasly as a fan of Miura's work, but just watching it from start to finish, a lot of bad decisions were made by Studio 4C, giving that to a bunch of independent companies that only have done romantic anime. It doesn't work. So they really dropped the ball on the quality and adaptation of that. But anyways, all that being said, last but not least is definitely Satoshi Kon. And Satoshi is, well, unfortunately, he is and has been for several years no longer with us. But he is one of those few exceptions that not only has he done incredible work as a manga artist, but also as a writer and also as a director. If you have never watched Perfect Blue, which is probably the closest thing to a Alfred Hitchcock style story done in anime, I definitely recommend it. It is not for little kids, so it definitely takes someone who is over the age of 18 to definitely understand that piece of cinema. And it's definitely one of those that will definitely keep you guessing as the story progresses. And it's definitely one of those that is really held up after, 30 years, 25 years maybe. But he did a manga with another director, Masamune Oishi, who did direct the Ghost in the Shell original anime, and he also directed Pat Labor, which is interesting because it's a police sci-fi comedy, the original series that is, but the movies themselves, they stray away from the comedy and they focus basically on the sci-fi mystery side of things. I mean, you still get some mech action going in, but basically you took two alpha personalities and you stuck them together in a room to create a very post-apocalyptic dystopian story called Seraphim, which I had no idea that this thing even existed until right about 2019, when I found a copy of it at Second and Charles, and it was being sold for like $5. Didn't realize that it was something that got released through Dark Horse, and so when I read it, the entire thing, and this is getting to tinfoil hat territory, but when you read the entire thing, is basically a epidemic comes out of China. Keep in mind, this thing was created in 1995, 96. An epidemic comes out of China, some sort of bird flu type strain that ends up infecting all the birds, in which also starts affecting humans, to which motor functions tend to stop. You start hallucinating and end up growing wings, which is why it's called Seraphim, so angel sort of thing. The only downside to this manga is at the same time it was being released, is that Neon Genesis Evangelion was also being released at the same time. So Evangelion was getting more of a spotlight than Seraphim. But yes, definitely spooky foreshadowing. And what's even trippier is that when Oishi is talking in the commentary in the back of this manga, and he was talking about how this stuff would be coming out from the Wuhan province of China and just all this stuff. And here we are getting to 2020 and the COVID outbreak happens after the riots that had happened in China, and then the COVID outbreak happens. And like, I had just read the story months before, and I'm like, oh, hello. So I'm pretty sure it's purely, coincidental, which, the movie Outbreak, which also came out in the mid 90s, be another perfect example. Which that movie, and also any movie, regarding like the zombie outbreaks and all that sort of stuff, it definitely puts in perspective how ill-equipped we are as a society, basically. And it's definitely one of those things that really does make you think. But yeah, it's definitely one. If you can find a copy of it, definitely pick it up. Like I said, I found it for like $5 at Second and Charles. Of course, this is 2019, which weirdly enough, there was like 5 more copies of that like 2 years ago in their manga section. Whether or not if it's still there or not is beyond me. But if you can, definitely pick it up, read it. But as far as just the whole inspiration and influence of anime and manga, it's been in my life for about 30 years. A lot longer than a lot of people that I know growing up, who didn't get their first taste of anime until Toonami had started, or post Toonami when it got into Adult Swim. So in some ways, I kind of lucked out by just being able to grab the stuff that I was able to, and definitely get into this different type of storytelling. And I do want to dip my toes a bit more into French comics, because I know that there's a lot out there. They definitely do a lot of storytelling, pretty similar to manga in terms of pacing. The size format of paper is somewhere between, it's like smaller than a magazine, but bigger than the typical, 6.5 by 9. I think that's what the Western comic size is. But it's definitely a whole different thing. And of course, the entire environment of how manga ends up being produced, and through its system of kind of like, oh wait, hey, it's a read.
Oh, sorry for being late. Didn't expect
No,
it.
no. Yeah, no, it's not a problem. I did explain at the very beginning that you had an emergency vet situation. Uh,
Yeah,
is the dog okay?
yeah. She's getting treatment currently right now. We a really good friend of ours who's a member of our dog park. She called my wife this morning and said, "Hey, someone's like found a dog and put it in like the dog park at their apartment complex, and it's an older dog, probably, gosh, at least maybe 8, 9 years old. She'd either been like hit by a car or gotten a dog fight because she had like puncture wounds all around like her neck and around her ear. So she
Hmm.
was actively bleeding. Um, and I had to like, with some help of some people, like put her in the back of our car and like take her to the vet. And then when I got to the vet, for whatever reason, the vet was like, okay, well, here's some forms you can sit out in our waiting room. So basically, the dog bled in the waiting room um, while we waited to get back. And I was finally able to convince him, was like, hey, look, I know I'm with a rescue, but like the dog's bleeding. And I was like, can we please get put back in the room just so there's blood, not blood continuing to like get on the furniture and the floor and on me and on
Yeah,
other dogs.
right.
So they finally did that, but it just took them forever to get back, and then having to wait for the owner of the rescue to like get up in touch with the vet that I was at, so that they were like, yeah, we agree to get payment and everything. So it's just, I basically got there at like 11. So I have been at that vet since 11 o'clock this Eastern Standard Time. And it
Right.
is now like 1:47 Eastern Standard Time. So I am insanely frustrated because I was supposed to be back in time for this.
Yeah, yeah,
And
and
yeah,
it's not a big problem. Like I told you in that chat, it was just that's a noble cause to be late to something like this. So that's totally fine. Which, funny enough, for the last uh, 5 or so days, I kept thinking that, yeah, I'm going to be going to Memphis Comic Expo, and I kept thinking, oh, it's going to be at the end of this month. No, it's happening today.
oh, oh wow, okay, that's
So
bad.
yeah, well, yeah, and I was just like, well, I mean, the plus side is that I don't have a table, so it's not
Oh,
like I
okay,
shelled out money. I was just going just to go see friends, pick up some stuff, see Jim Cheong
okay,
finally, because I mean he was at Baltimore when we were there, and I didn't have time to stop by his table, and which coincidentally enough, in the which, since we're talking about influences, Jim Cheong. Uh, so I when you walk to Haven Comics and you turn around and you look up at the top of the door frame, there is a 2-page spread from Scion that he did back in the early 2000s.
okay.
That particular issue is called Haven, and
Oh, I didn't
that's
know that.
and yeah, and I didn't know that either. And like I knew it because I've read the story so many times for the last 20 years or so,
Mhm.
and it just did not click that that is where Josh got the name and so on. So one of the ideas when Josh and I were talking was the possibility of me taking those with me or taking a photo of it to show them. So yeah. That being said, here we are.
Yeah. No, it's kind of funny like how that works out. I don't know. It's like time. Like, where's the time gone? Like, really? Because
Yeah,
I mean, I felt like just the other day I turned around and it was like August, and now we're at the end of September, and we're getting ready to turn into October, and then
it's
my
like
wife's, yeah,
well,
and
it's like Mother Nature is trying to
yeah,
do the alphabet song and just blazes through L to get the P.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just like how little kids used to do it. So
It's crazy, man. Like I only got 2 more months left, and then like Nate will be here, my son.
Mm,
So I mean, yeah, it's really going crazy. So what have I missed for the last
okay.
40 some
Um,
minutes?
so I've really only gotten to like the first half of what I was talking about, and it was basically just inspiration and influences. Are they one the same? Does one cause the other to exist? My answer is yes to both. Um, because without influences, where does the inspiration come from?
Right.
Or something influencing you, where did does inspiration cause you to create, basically? And then I started talking about art influences, both how music has dictated some of the stuff and how I do things, and also not just with Western influences. I did mention a couple of one or two French artists. First one being Mobius, and whoever the guy is that did Black Sad. Like,
Sebastian something. I don't.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's just his watercolors. It's just it blows my mind, and it makes me think about doing line work differently to accommodate something like that. Um, and then, of course, I just went through a whole list of manga influences, which the pretty obvious three is Miura Otomo and Shiro Masamune. But I was also talking about Naoki Urasawa, who did 20th Century Boys and
Mhm.
Monster. Hiromu Arakawa, who did Full Metal Alchemist. Um, Ryuichi Ikegami, Satoshi Kon, uh, Akihiro Yamada. It's just even Inoue, who did Vagabond,
Right.
which I was actually talking about how Ikigami and Inoue, I would say, are like the Frank Cho and Adam Hughes of the manga world.
Yeah. I
Because
guess
it's
so.
just they're approaching it from a whole other plane of existence, and it gets into that territory of where comics start to meld into fine art at some
Yeah.
points. Because I mean, both of those, both Hughes and Cho, they're just as influenced by Art Nouveau as they are by guys like Lynn Decker and Norman Rockwell. I'm about to say Norman Osborn. Uh,
Well, it's kind of funny that you mentioned like Rockwell because when Neil Adams was still alive, like I mean, I got to meet him like several times at like Heroes Con and like just traveling to shows and stuff and talking to him. And it was interesting to me that like Neil always talked about that he learned a lot from Rockwell himself because Rockwell, if you look at what he did, is that like he took pictures of like live subjects, mostly people that he knew.
yeah,
And what he would do is that he would actually take those photos and he would actually like project them on the canvas. And that's what he would use. And like, that's how he would paint.
hmm,
Because I actually have a book that's on my bookshelf. Um, it came out a couple years ago and it actually has all the reference images that Rockwell used in his studio. So like everything that he ever took, like facial expressions and like cars and you can actually see it in there. And even one of the pieces that he did of the little boy and the cop at the diner, if
yeah,
you look at the way that it's set up with the lighting, it's inside his studio. The reflections in the metal are of his studio.
that's interesting.
Yeah, I never realized that until Neil was talking about that and about how he used projectors and like use live models.
Hmm.
So because he always then that brings up the debate about, well, should you use reference or like not use reference? But the thing
Yep.
is that like everybody uses reference, and if we know when people aren't using reference because things look weird, like a bicycle, or sometimes when you try to do perspective.
Hmm.
So Neil always would just bring about the fact that there's a way that you can take an image, kind of like what Rockwell did, and yeah, it may have been a picture, and yeah, he painted that picture, but the thing is, he was able to change it enough where it still got turned into the fine artwork that we have now,
Yeah.
rather than what we see in museums.
There's an Instagram artist by the name of Rob Porter. He goes by Robotox. I believe that's his handle on social media. If he hasn't been banned from every platform except for Instagram. But he would always brag about how, oh, I don't use reference whenever. And not saying that like his stuff is bad or disproportionate. It's obviously very well proportionate. And of course, he's doing a lot of pinup art. But the thing is that like you've been around so much stuff that is your reference.
Right.
Life is your reference, believe it or not. And you can argue about it as much as you want till you're blue in the face. But it boils down to the end of the day, everything that you do in life, there is a reference point to something. So like if I'm thinking about drawing a water bottle, I might pick this up because it's right here.
Right.
It's not always stuff that you get off of a Google search or things that are in books. Just everyday life stuff is your reference. People that go out in parks and do these like watercolor sketches and paintings and stuff like that, they're using life as their reference to do that stuff. So hearing that argument that I don't use reference and that makes me a better artist. No, it doesn't. And I would rather someone straight up admit that, yes, I heavily use reference for this because I'm not good at it. I would rather sit next to that person in a subway than the person that says, no, I don't use artists. Or sorry, I don't use reference because I am an artist. Right. Whatever. Yeah, I don't want to be around that kind of person. Now, completely different areas of like influences, books and movies, which I actually had this discussion with two of my best friends, Ruben and Andrew, who I played music with. And we were actually talking about like our personal top 3 movies.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just like, oh, this gets really hard. But these are 3 that have influenced me to inspire me to think about doing a layout or, and of course, they're all period pieces as well, even though mostly fiction, but they are period pieces. Last of the Mohicans,
mm-hmm.
Last Samurai,
mm-hmm.
and a French film called Brotherhood of the Wolf, which is kind of like The Hound of Baskervilles, but it's set in colonial Canada, basically. Mm-hmm. Or no, sorry, colonial times, but it's in France. But they do talk about Fort Wilderness and all the stuff that happened in Canada during the French Indian Wars.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, it's a really quick blinker, you'll miss it kind of reference. And of course, the main character has he says it in front of the French as his manservant, but in reality, it is his friend and I guess cohort brother of sorts, who is a Native American. Mm-hmm. But the actor playing it is martial artist Mark Dacascos.
That was a weird choice.
It is a weird choice, but when you look at the fight scenes and stuff, it's very influenced by John Woo.
That would make sense.
Yeah. It's one of those late 90s, early 2000s films that you can tell that there's a lot of reference points to a couple of, different directors and stuff like that. So like I said, there is that John Woo element here. There's that, sweeping epic period director over here. And so they basically just blended it together to create a story out of it. And it is a really interesting mystery. Granted, it's nowhere near of a like Criterion classic, like mm-hmm. In the Name of the Rose.
Mm-hmm.
But it's definitely in that cult classic territory that like stuff like The Crow is in.
Right.
You know, didn't do well in the box office, but 15, 20 years later, it's one of those films that gets talked about in certain circles. Which been hearing yet again for the umpteenth time. Oh, there's going to be another Crow movie coming out. Really?
I know.
It's like Macbeth. It's the one and done. Let the legacy of Brandon Lee be exactly that. Don't touch it.
Yeah, I agree with you on that too. Like, I mean, we talked about that too. That like we've already had like two Crow films. First one obviously being the best with Brandon Lee, and
Three.
well, yeah, that's right. You did correct me. It is
Yeah,
three.
yeah.
So,
Which Kirsten
yeah,
Dunst was in the third one.
really,
Yes.
I did not know that.
So if I remember correctly, I could have sworn that Tara Reid was in the second one, and then Kirsten Dunst was in the third one. But the people that they chose to play, as the next iteration of The Crow, were just these no-name actors, and I have not seen them in a single movie since then. In other stuff, which I didn't realize this, but the director for the first one, Alex Proyas, apparently he did music videos, and then he got asked to do The Crow, and then he did a similar bleak kind of movie called Dark City.
Oh
It
yeah, I
had
remember that.
yeah, Jennifer Connelly. I think Rufus Sewell was in it.
Yeah, it was like Alien set in like a noir type, like
Yeah,
1920s, 30s type. I mean, it was a super weird movie.
it
Really
is.
cool though.
It is. It definitely has a Twilight Zone, Outer Limits kind of, storyline, basically. Because after a certain time would stop, and then these men in black, if you will,
Yeah,
are basically kind of dictating what's going to happen next, or omitting memories and replacing them with other things. It was definitely interesting. It was really bold. And again, like The Crow, it's definitely one of those like cult classic kind of films that gets talked about,
yeah.
20 years down the road. Um,
I mean, even the stage design, I remember it being like, it reminded me a lot of like Fritz Lang's Metropolis, but it also reminded me hints
yeah.
of like Batman the animated series. And I think it was because it was so dark,
Mhm.
and like they used like a lot of painted backgrounds in there too. So I kind of wonder if they kind of did the same technique that maybe that they did for Batman the animated series, but they painted on black and then they painted like the layers of color over top of it to try to
Mm,
give it that more of that gritty feel. So
yeah, that really is a good question.
yeah,
All right, internets. If you know the answers, put it in the chats.
yeah,
uh, James said that he watched the original Crow movie. Yes. It was awesome as I remembered. Yes. Main character inspired my own creators. Yes. Um, I will recommend, if you haven't read The Crow, I do recommend I believe they call it the Ultimate Collection. Um, and apparently, in this version of it, you do have the original story, but there's also a bunch of pages that got added in like a decade or so after the final issue
yeah,
had dropped. But there were pages that James O'Barr just could not figure out how to put across the vision the way that he wanted it to, with the stuff that he had to deal with at that time period, because it was super independent in terms of his distribution of it, the printing, just all of it was just as bare bones DIY as you could possibly think of, like a fanzine almost. And of course, it did end up getting picked up by a distributor, publisher of some sort. I just don't remember who the company
was it Mirage?
It could have been them, could have been Caliber. It was just one of the. It definitely wasn't Eclipse.
No, it wasn't Eclipse when it came out because I remember like reading one of those collections that he had that they had like produced. Like he had went back and like changed stuff and like added drawings to it.
Yeah.
Um,
He added drawings. He added in some poetry, but there was a epilogue of sorts that he wanted to add in. That was, if I remember it, of course, it's in my bookshelf right now. But if I remember it, I want to say it was a lot of ink wash that
it
he did.
was,
Yeah, which
yeah,
is completely different from the actual line work, which is very just black and white. And of course, the storyline arguably a lot more violent and a lot darker than the actual movie, but still good.
yeah.
Um,
I mean, I remember it being that way. I mean, plus he himself was going through so much because, like, isn't it based off the fact of like his girlfriend that got murdered or
yeah.
got killed,
So
and then like, I mean, it's
if
pretty dark, like how it all happened.
yeah, so he was serious with whoever it was that he was dating at the time, and she ended up getting murdered, and so which around the same time period he was enlisted in the Marines.
Oh, I did not know that.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, he was enlisted. I want to say he was in the Marines, and he did the Crow as his grieving process, basically.
Jeez.
So it was literally just the entire catharsis of how do I handle this while, you know, trying to continue on with life. And it was just everything got poured into this body of work. And so, if I remember correctly, which if I'm wrong, someone please correct me.
Someone will definitely correct you.
Yeah, yeah. At least I can admit that I'm trying to remember things and I don't have it written down right in front of me. So,
Right.
but it was definitely one of those things where I want to say that they finally did find the person that actually did do it. But regardless, his creation of the Crow was basically, if there was a person that could exact some sort of justice, which in reality was more so vengeance and wrath,
Yeah.
to be that, I guess, paragon for those who were wrongly murdered. That would be it. So that was basically that whole thing. And of course, he was also highly influenced by a lot of goth and new wave, which kind of dictated obviously the character design, but also the look. Because like stuff like the Smiths, the Damned, Joy Division, of course, there are some lyrics from those bands actually scattered throughout the Ultimate Collection, which was also interesting. And in some ways, it's kind of like whenever you read Watchmen and you got that, was it the Black Freighter?
Yeah.
Yeah, the
Black
comic.
Panther.
Yeah, the comic within the comic.
Mm.
In some ways, those lyrics and those added pieces is kind of like the comic within the comic, except it's like a book of really dark, cathartic add-ins to bring in this whole ball of wrath together, more than it already was.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned like the influence too. I've always wondered, and I've never talked to him, but I wonder if like the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles had any effect on him, because when you look at like his early work and look at The Crow, he's very similar to Kevin Nolan. Like how like the rough, kind of like blocky, like how the people look.
Okay.
And like I don't know if is that just because like it was what he was able to create at the time. But
Mm.
of course, the Crow got better as he went along, because his artwork gets better as you continue to do the craft, of course. But and not to dismiss it, but like if you hold up some of those pages from the Crow and some of Nolan's early turtle work, it looks a lot like the same.
Hmm.
And I've always wondered that, like if
Wait,
maybe there was some like correlation.
Kevin Nolan or Kevin Eastman?
Kevin Eastman, not Nolan.
Okay, yeah, sorry. Well,
Yeah.
I mean, well, here's the thing, Nolan does have some blockiness
Mhm.
to his work anyway. So I was just kind of going along with him, like, wait a second, he might be talking about Kevin Eastman.
I am talking about Kevin Eastman.
Yeah.
Yeah, my brain's like all over today, man. Like the day's been like the most off Saturday.
You should have a
Oh,
podcast. You should have a podcast called Between Two Kevins and have Kevin
yeah.
Eastman, Kevin Nolan.
Really, the best podcast would probably be like, so you have to rush to be on the podcast. That's the thing, like rush to be on the podcast.
Right.
But
Now, this so as far as just like influences and things that have inspired you from stuff that I've talked about you in the past, obviously Mike Mignola is a big one for you.
mhm.
Um,
I would say too, like besides Mangola, because I want to talk about him anyway.
yeah, and I know that Jack Kirby is also another big one for you as well.
Jack Kirby, Joe Cuber. I would even say Darwin Cook too, because like it used to be. If you look at
Yeah.
like how my style was originally, like it took a lot of influences from Darwin. And I still kind of do at time. I mean, Alex Toth is in there as well.
Mhm.
Mobius. I'd even say Doug Wiley, who did a lot of like Johnny Quest stuff. Like his stuff's up there.
Yeah, I was just talking about Mobius earlier and
Right.
how he influenced not just Frank Cho's like super clean line work, but also Jeff Darrow in terms of those big establishing shots that he
Right.
does. Which, funny enough, Comic Tropes on YouTube actually just dropped a video on Jeff Darrow's body of work. It's about 30 minutes. It's about 30 minutes, but it's a great watch and. I didn't realize that he did a comic with Frank Miller called Big Guy and Rusty the Boy Robot, which
Oh, yeah.
I remember that as a cartoon, never as a comic. And apparently it was done through Dark Horse.
Mm-hmm.
Go figure. But yeah, so apparently he did that with Frank Miller and how that was that body of work was influenced by Darrow's time living in Tokyo. Which a lot of his artwork, which if you watch a Comic Tropes video, he does talk about Otomo being an influence of his.
Yeah, I could see that.
On top of Mobius's, stuff like clashing together as well. So that's really interesting to see that parallel. And of course, Travis Charest is another one who's definitely, obviously, I would say, influenced by Mobius. Whether or not if he agrees or not, but I think there is
Right.
a decent amount of Mobius in his work.
Well, I think it's interesting too that like when you look at like Otomo's work, especially with like Akira or Domu, even some of like the other stuff that he's done too, like his pacing and what he does with like action, he not only can show you like the bullet hitting somebody, but the after effect of what's that like. So like it's like someone gets shot in the head and they fall down a bunch of stairs. So like it's like the physics of them falling down the stairs.
Yeah.
Or what does it look like when Takeda like gets in the tank and everything like that in volume 3 of Akira?
It's either 3 or 4. Yeah. So
yeah. Like when he's in there, it's amazing how his work is, but also back to Mike Mignola. Here's the thing that I've thought about in comics that we see now. Mike Mignola will take like a page or maybe 2 pages for establishing shots to like basically bring you in this world or this scene. And a lot of other comic artists now, they don't really do it. And I don't know if it's because of like page counts a thing or it's just in American comics, they don't do what the Japanese will do. And even what some of the indie books will do, where they just like, they let the page breathe and they establish it. Because I've been listening to Manga Splaining and they talked about that because there's a guy who did.
I'm sorry. That's a great word right there. Hashtag manga splaining.
It's a wonderful podcast. I highly recommend it to anybody that wants to check it out. They basically take Chip Zdarsky and they like introduce them to manga. And
interesting.
It actually has like broadened my horizons a lot for artwork that's out there. Like there's a really good person who named Mishishira Adachi who did a baseball manga called Cross Game. And
That sounds familiar.
yeah, basically what it is, it's that it takes a place with a kid named Ko, and then like this really good female friend of his that he has. And I don't want to spoil it, but basically like something happens early on, and it's kind of like, what is the impact of that throughout his life? What does it mean to promise something to somebody that's forever 8 years old? And he is a master of like taking you kind of like what Mangola does and establishing shots. Like there is a funeral scene that is beautiful because like you would think it's not really about the crying or so much, it's about the feeling that you
Yeah.
get and like how visually it looks. And if you ever get a chance and you love just looking at art, look at what he does for the pacing of that because it's beautiful on how he's
Uh,
able to capture it.
on a similar note, in Full Metal Alchemist, when it gets to Hughes's funeral,
Mhm.
it's again, it's not about the fact of, it is definitely a sad part because of the events that transpire, because you don't expect it.
Right.
Sorry that spoils something to everyone there, but the character only lasts like what, 3 volumes at most.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, out of the 20 something volumes of the entire series. So yeah, get over it. But it's really not so much that. It's in terms of the fact that yes, it is a sad thing, but it's how that grief transpires differently between person to person to person.
Right.
So when it gets to Flame Alchemist Mustang,
Yeah.
when it gets to him, and you see, and he basically says something about it's raining today, and so it's just like it's not raining, and you realize he's crying, and so it's just one of those things where it's just like you see that difference of how grief transpires differently between people, and it even affects the characters later on, as far as just some of the decisions that they make, some of the outbursts of certain things transpiring. It's just like we don't want to make the same mistake again, but yet sometimes that mistake ends up repeating itself, and so it's
Right.
just like, how does that affect that person psychologically down the road? Which same but yet also different kind of situation would be like in Berserk, in terms of how Guts makes his decisions post Eclipse,
Right.
because all of that pain and all of that grief, and he's bottling it up inside, but yet he's letting it out, and just not thinking about the consequences of what happens to other people, until it gets to a point where it's just like, now I do have to think about other people and not just me all the time. But yeah, at the same time, I got to do this mission, sort of thing. So it's definitely interesting to see that psychology, not really so much adapt, but definitely as it evolves into a couple different areas of, it's not really compartmentalization, but it's definitely like a different level of psychosis.
Yeah.
Um,
I think it's interesting too, like depending on, like if you look at Western comics,
mhm.
like how we have it here in America, you can probably look at Watchmen. And I know I hate to constantly use that, but like,
It's a good one to use as a
oh, it is
reference.
a good one because you kind of get to see it, especially at the comedian's funeral, like everyone's interpretation of that character. So it's kind of like, what does the ripple effect of grief look like? Even what does grief look like when, like, we learned that the comedian went and confronted Moloch, and he's trying to tell Rorschach like everything that happened. We don't see that a lot in comics, like mainstream comics. And when I say that, I mean like the big two. I mean like Marvel and DC, because like
Yeah.
you only have like 24 pages. Someone's got to get in a fight, or get punched, because if you don't have that, it's almost like people are going to be like, oh, it was a snooze fest. You completely missed this one because Peter Parker cried the entire time. So like, but the thing is that there's no advancement of the character, and I really hate the fact that like it just seems like, to me anyway, that mainstream comics has gone that way, that where we've lost character development,
Mm,
to the point because we would rather have a fight happen than have growth of a
yeah.
character. And that's the thing that frustrates me a lot. And I guess that's why now, like, have kind of turned like more indie. Like, my stack is basically like Image and like Dark Horse. And then like I have like the Shonen Jump app and the Viz app on my phone that I'll read like manga through. I'll buy manga. So, I mean, I want that. I think it's like my taste as a reader has changed
Yeah.
from, I guess, from being like an artist and learning and everything. I mean, and that's good. That's a good thing to have growth, but it just makes me really sad because it's like there's so many stories that people want to tell and it can probably impact more people,
Hmm.
especially using like key characters. Like, it just seems like back in the 90s and early 2000s, they took a lot more risk than they do now.
Yeah.
And, you know,
I
why?
think as far as just like the risk of it, and Dan Slott had tweeted something and he was talking about how, well, they didn't ruin the character. It's just writers have to take a risk and blah, blah, blah,
Right.
and so on and so forth. Well, here's the thing. Is it really a risk when you're calling it that to hide the fact that your writing is not up to snuff?
I
Uh,
don't know.
and it's not directed towards Dan Slott whatsoever.
Right.
It's just a in general sort of thing. And my perfect example of this is going to be Zeb Wells' run recently with Amazing Spider-Man. It's a dumpster fire within a dumpster fire. Just
Is that with
that.
Spider Boy?
Uh, so Dan Slott actually did introduce Spider Boy in
Okay.
his own Spider-Man thing, which there was almost no point, but yet he's getting his own book. But with Amazing Spider-Man and what's been happening, this is when so Romita Jr. had came back to do this with Zeb Wells, and it's just we're going to continue on wrecking the whole situation between Pete and MJ. They'll never get back together. Um, and then the whole death of Kamala Khan situation, which ended up getting spoiled weeks before it even dropped. And then there was just a bunch of other stuff that was going on, and it's just like I can't read Amazing Spider-Man because it's terrible. Like the writing is not up to snuff, and yet editorial lets it pass. But yet the best versions of Peter Parker are in the books that he's not in his own flagship title. It makes zero sense.
Yeah.
Which is on the complete opposite side of the coin. With say DC with their recent run, I just read the first issue of Wonder Woman that Tom King has put out, and it is probably my favorite Wonder Woman comic that I have read since the Gail Simone, Joel Thompson run that Terry Dodson did back in the early 2000s. It's got that feel of so remember how with the Hulk he was always on the run from the government?
Yeah.
Because yeah, so it's the same kind of situation. So the whole plot synopsis for those of you who have not picked up this issue yet. So an Amazon ends up basically beating the crap out of 10 guys who were getting a little bit too handsy after she told them no. And it becomes a whole political quagmire because Amazons, even though they're all fictional characters, they have their own amnesty and their own embassies set up in America and so on and so forth. Because Paradise Island is a country technically in the DC world, so it becomes a whole political quagmire. And basically, the U.S. passes a law in terms of extraditing all Amazons, and that also includes all children that said Amazons happen to have as well, which they are also technically American because they are, born on U.S. soil. And so that becomes like a whole ICE kind of situation as well. So as of right now, Diana, Wonder Woman, is the only Amazon that is still on American soil, and the government is gunning after her because she's trying to figure out if said Amazon actually did kill these guys, because of a particular reason and it's being covered up, or if it's something else entirely. So you do have that Hulk kind of feel going on. You've also got a little bit of like Jason Bourne and
Kind of, yeah.
The Fugitive, that sort of thing going on. So it's definitely interesting. They do introduce two new, I guess, villains, bad guys into the situation. One of them happens to be a government agent, and the other one happens to be this character known as the Sovereign, who happens to have the lasso of lies, which is a polar opposite of Diana's lasso of truth. So it's interesting to see where Tom King is going to continue on taking this. But the pacing of it.
How does that work then? Because the lasso of truth, you have to tell the truth. So if you have the lasso of lies and you put on somebody, do they just lie to you?
I think what the lasso of lies is going to do is that you get to implement a lie into that person. Whereas the lasso of truth draws out truth of a person, I believe the lasso of lies is going to put a lie into a person.
Put a lie in there.
Yeah, I think that's how it's going to work. It hasn't been explained yet, and I'm figuring that it will get explained in issue 2 or 3, whenever next we happen to see the Sovereign. But when that got shown in the near towards the end of the book, I was just like, oh, this is good. Because this is interesting character development that we haven't seen with Wonder Woman in probably about 15 or so years. Which that's definitely something that I've been noticing with this whole Dawn of DC stuff. Yes, there are some risks in terms of them having to reboot their entire world yet again within 10 years. But there is a reason behind it, and I think it's probably one of the best reasons so far, which is continuity.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, I just picked up the new Birds of Prey because I thought I like Big Barda, so like I thought it was cool that Big Barda was gonna be in it.
Calling Cassandra a little bat.
Yeah, I just wanted to get it because it looked interesting, and I like, I don't get many mainstream books, if any. Besides that one, the only book I'm getting that's mainstream is like the Chip Zdarsky Batman, and then I'm getting like the Fantastic Four because I'm absolutely loving that. Like, because it feels like the old FF. Like each story feels like, oh, some crazy crap is happening, or like the Doombot that thought that like his directive was just to protect this little old lady.
Yeah,
and like he built this whole world for her, and I was like, this is absolutely insane. I was like, this is awesome.
Yeah,
so
that was something that Josh was talking about when that first issue dropped, and he's just like, this is like old school fun, Fantastic Four, and this is what they've been missing for the longest time. And you're not wrong. There is that whole character development section between the big two that has been lost for a long time. You did see bits and pieces of it with the Ultimate Universe and with the New 52, not so much with Rebirth. But as far as this whole Dawn of DC thing, there is a difference in continuity. There is some character growth that is happening. Definitely with how Birds of Prey is set up. The artwork hasn't sold me on it yet. It's good writing.
You don't like what's his name? Leo. I follow him on Instagram. I really like his style. It reminds me of Colin Cooks.
Yeah, I just give me another issue, and I'll see how I feel about it. I mean, it's not who I would pick for Birds of Prey, but I do love how they're introducing Zealot into the Bird of Prey. I thought that was a bold move, an even bolder move to put in Big Barda.
Yeah.
But to have Big Barda paired up with Cassandra, that's interesting. To have Harley Quinn paired up with Zealots, total, polar opposite. Nowhere near like, her being teamed up with Grifter or Lady Tron or anyone else from the Wildcat universe, which, by the way, if you have not read the DC Wildcat stuff, it's probably been some of the best Wildcats writing that I've read in a long time.
I haven't checked it.
And it's not to put Joe Phillips and not Joe Phillips. It's not to put Joe Cassidy and Sean Phillips in a negative aspect, because they're both, good creatives. I don't think they were the best picks for the last era of Image Wildcats before Jim Lee took it over to DC. But Steven Segovia has done a fantastic job with just bringing back what kind of feels like a continuation of 90s Wildcats, or late 90s Wildcats, I should say. Nowhere near the French comic-esque vision that Travis Charest did when he was working with Scott Lobdell, but it's definitely a little bit more American. But you've definitely, if you've read Segovia's stuff, like his artwork, you can definitely get an idea of what he's trying to do. I keep forgetting the writer for this recent run of Wildcats, but I want to say they're going to be on issue 11 or 12 next week. So, which is really interesting. And I know that's like totally completely veering off the subject just a little bit, but you were talking about pacing in terms of as far as just not letting things breathe. And that's something that I've noticed when you get into French comics, which is something I want to delve into more, is that some of the stuff that I have seen, not just with the French, but also with even Spanish artists as well. Yeah. They're all romantic countries, whatever. But the size format of the paper is different between, book to book. Enrico Marini, for instance, with some of the stuff that he's been doing with the Eagles of Rome and Batman Europe, and different pacing, different way of doing it, but it's still visual storytelling, and it allows things to breathe, and it's very inspiring to see. And it is something that I wish could happen a bit more within the big two, but I feel like, again, I think some of it is there is just too much focus on the 20 to 24 page format.
Yeah.
And how many of those pages are going to be filled with advertisements. Then there is the editorial situation as well, because I feel like there's a lot less risk with some of the storytelling that's been happening within the last 10 years. I'm saying that judiciously, as far as just like not allowing artists to also be the writers, because case in point, Daniel Warren Johnson has done stuff for both Marvel and DC where he is both the writer and the artist.
Right.
Because Wonder Woman Dead Earth, limited 4-issue run, fantastic story. Totally not in continuity of anything with Wonder Woman whatsoever, but as far as a just standalone kind of Elseworldish sort of thing, it was fantastic. His turn on Beta Ray Bill,
it was amazing. It was fantastic how he got the sword of Surtur and like everything. Like,
it was probably the most heavy metal thing since
Murder Falcon.
Yes.
Yeah.
It was just, you could tell that, some of the things that definitely worked for Murder Falcon definitely leached over into Beta Ray Bill, and which, funny enough, Thor Ragnarok, with just how good of a movie it was, kind of also helped it within its sales as well. But one of my favorite things in Beta Ray Bill, and I think it was the first issue where you saw the cross section of Starship.
Yeah.
And you got to see where like everyone was with it was such a great risk of storytelling, and it worked because you were able to follow everything that's going on. It's the same thing with Bruno Redondo with some of the stuff that he's been doing with Nightwing. It took a giant risk by doing him and Taylor both doing a giant risk of an entire issue where it's one seamless panel spread across 24 pages.
Fascinating.
Yeah, and it's groundbreaking stuff that we hadn't seen in the big two in a while, especially not for Nightwing, especially not for a DC title in general. He even did a recent issue where it was literally done in the perspective of Dick Grayson. The entire issue is first person perspective, and I believe it's issue 105 or 106. That issue sold out like that, simply because it's one of those issues where it's, in some ways, it could be considered as a key issue if you want to be speculative
Yeah, I
about
guess so. Yeah.
it.
The thing about too, like the time that it took for him to do that,
Oh yeah,
because like he's doing everything from like how a person sees everything.
Mhm.
So like how difficult is that for somebody to draw? And I think that's the biggest thing too with it. But it was the same artist and writer on that issue, right?
Yeah, it's Tom Taylor and Bruno Redondo.
Okay.
Yeah,
Well, see, that's the thing too that comes down to is because I just was reading today that they canceled the solicitation for Justice Society 10 that's
yeah.
coming out. Which I love the Justice Society, but I haven't picked it up in a long time. And I'm wondering, I don't know, that's my beef. Anything that I don't like the fact that when I pick up a series, I want it to be the same artist and same
Yeah.
writer and same colorist. But sometimes I get it that times come up and like, but I don't like it when they like if they put one artist here to this issue and this because it takes me out of the story too much.
It does, and that was something that kind of took me out of Wildcats when
Yeah.
Charest was brought back in, because it started off with him doing the interiors, Richard Friend doing the inks, whoever it was that was doing the colors. But then when it got to issue 3 and 4, half the issue was done by completely different artists. Now,
Yeah.
Richard still did inks for all the pages of it. But even he said, Richard is, because he also has a YouTube channel, because he was kind of going back in the history of his own works and some of the stuff that he did during Image, and even he was talking about how the the days that he gets in panels from Travis were like some of the best fun he's ever had. And part of the reason as to why he wanted to get hired as an inker at Image was because Travis, the stuff that he was doing, he understood the line work and exactly what he was trying to put out. And so it's one of those rare occurrences whenever you have the penciler and the inker and the colorist all on the same page. Perfect example would be Greg Capullo, together with Jonathan Glapian on inks and Danny Mickey on colors. I think it was Danny Mickey or it was someone else. But when those guys get together, it's just, it's going to work because they know each other that well. Same thing with Dan Warren Johnson and Mike Spicer.
Right.
You put those two guys together, they know exactly what they're going to do, and it's gold every single time. But it also kind of gets into a point of people get so comfortable with each other for so long that it just kind of becomes a mainstay kind of thing. So it's just like, well, we know it's them. They're not going to do anything wrong until that time happens that they drop, the egg that cracks, basically. And it's just like, what is this?
Well, I think, but see, you hit something interesting too, because so for case in point, like with Danny Warren Johnson and like Mike Spicer,
Mhm.
we could possibly say the same for Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips. They've been able to niche out a niche in the comics community to where I don't think they've ever turned out a bad book, period. Someone could always argue with me, but I think that really they work well together. They know what they're doing and they're given the time to do it. And I think that's the biggest thing with like, they're not under the gun every single week to turn out an issue of like Criminal or anything else. They're not like working on Batman, but I'm saying that the publishers, I don't know, if we could get away from the monthly, how everything's done monthly now,
Yeah.
maybe that would work and maybe it would be better. I don't know. But I think that we're losing a lot of talent and we're losing a lot of art and a lot of exploration because we're stuck in this things like, oh, it's got to be 24 pages. It can't be any longer than that. We've got to make sure we hit it by this deadline. Because think about all the hands that that book has to go through before it even makes it to the publisher.
Yeah.
And I mean, not publisher, but the printer. And then the printer's got to print it, and then they've got to ship it, and then you've got to make sure it goes to the comic shop. But the thing is that what would you rather have? Would you rather have that book that you could get like 24 pages every like what 2 week every 2 or 3 weeks in a month, or like first of the month, last of the month, versus a manga that I could get that's not 24 pages, it's between like 250 and 300 pages, even though it's not colored. But like what
Now, this gets into an interesting subject regarding manga, because as far as just the Western consumption of it, we're getting a straight up volume that the individual chapters, which can be argued as an issue of sorts, are being printed in a previews type book. Because some of them are weeklies, some of them are monthlies, and some of them are bi-monthlies. And because like the whole marketing aspect of it is done differently than it is in the US. And when it gets into that kind of situation, I would rather have a bi-weekly, a monthly, or a bi-monthly book
of course
than 15 weekly books, where you may have a superstar creative team, but the end product is up and down the entire time.
When I think that's too, like going back to what you said about the French comics too. If you look at a French comic, when a French comic comes out, it comes out as what we call a graphic novel. So essentially it's a volume, and it can be a volume in a series. And the great thing about that is that, okay, volume 1 has come out. You have maybe a year to 6 months before volume 2 comes out. So think about all the people that you can get with a really good quality volume 1.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're like, okay, it's going to translate over to this. And what I noticed too is that, and I'm blanking on the name of the publisher, and I do not know why. What's the name of the French publisher that published
like Black Sad and all that?
Yeah, Black Sad. They don't do. It's not humanoids, but I have a couple of books.
If it's not, actually, you know what? I'm just going to open up Google, and we are going to figure this one out.
Because I want to pull some French stuff off the shelf for a minute.
Yeah. Let's see here. Oh, whoops. Hey, did you know that there's actually a Black Sad computer game? It's on Steam.
No.
Yeah, I didn't either. It's called Under the Skin. Apparently, there are videos of it from like 2019. I had no idea. Okay, let's see here.
So, and the reason why I say that this is a translated one, because this one is by.
Oh, you've got that.
Yes, I have it. I bought it because you sent it to me, and I had to buy it.
I have yet to receive my copy, so I've got to. Yes, I know. It sucks to suck.
Yeah, it does. It is beautiful.
I know.
It's so good, bro.
I know.
So good. But yeah, I got it for my local shop. Highly recommend this. And
yeah,
I will say too, Jordy Lafreeby.
I thought you were about to say LaForge.
No, not LaForge. But he did Dark Horse actually printed this for Always Never, and they did like a this is the English translated version of the French comic.
I've seen some of his stuff on Instagram.
It's gorgeous. I mean,
look
at how the setup is. Because I mean, he does some beautiful artwork, and even here it is.
So
this is Euro Comics.
according to what I'm looking up, apparently Black Sabbath was actually released in the U.S. through Dark Horse.
Okay.
However, the European publisher is Dargaud, if that's how you pronounce it.
Guessing so.
Yeah, it's a French publishing company.
See, it's saying that Eurocomics too was published through a distributor of IDW. See, because I have like the Jerome K. Block stuff because this is big for like Chris Somney.
Mm-hmm. Oh, Ventures of Tintin. I keep forgetting the name of the writer artist for that, but another perfect example of French French comic type storytelling thing, but yet it's also equally recognized in the U.S., at least within a specific time period. Which I hate the fact that the Peter Jackson film was released, 2010, 2012, somewhere around there.
Right.
When I feel like that should have been a movie that probably should have been released back in the 70s or 80s. Obviously, not computer graphics, definitely, old school animation for sure. So to step outside of, our influences and, these things that have inspired us to create the stuff that we want to visually, whether it's the way that we do our line work, the way that we build our characters, to the pacing of storytelling, which since we have talked about French comics and manga so much, that is something within the pacing and establishing shots, character development stuff, which I feel like is done in a more cinematic way versus the traditional big two type comics. It's definitely something that I'm trying to lean back into more.
Right.
And so now we're going to get into the subject of how to sidestep from being an imitator from the things that you are getting into when it comes to like, these are things that are inspiring me, but unfortunately I'm being looked at as like a one-for-one copy. And this gets into a really interesting subject because we start getting into like imposter syndrome.
Right.
And what's interesting is that happens to even the pros in the industry. Even they struggle with it from time to time. I know that Mitch Gerard's, whenever he is doing whatever book with Tom King or whoever else is a writer, there's been a couple times where I've seen some tweets where it's just like, I feel like I'm not good enough. And then the next day it's just like, I'm listening to Taylor Swift. Here we go. And so he's into he is the one person who I do not expect to listen to Taylor Swift as much as he does, but he is a Swiftie to the core. But something that I have remembered from my days of being in the music industry in college is that there is a defining line between being an innovator and being an imitator.
Yeah.
And the biggest difference between the two is that an imitator, they are always going to be a dime a dozen.
My wife's making a special guest appearance.
Hello.
They found the dog's owner.
For real?
Yeah, for real.
Oh, thank God. Is everything? They found the dog's owner.
Yeah.
The dog that I rescued. So.
The microchip was displaced. I think they saw it on the X-ray.
Oh, good. Thank God.
And the woman contacted me on Facebook because I posted the dog.
Okay, good. That's wonderful. I'm glad that they found the owner. Hopefully things will get.
And it was a puncture wound. She was not hit by a car.
Okay. Well. Okay. Well, at least thank you for telling me. I appreciate that.
I figured it would.
Yeah.
Help.
Also, to have the dog be seen by the vet, it took $1,300. Yep.
I'm going to the
All right. I'll be done soon.
Okay.
I love you.
Love you. Bye, Thomas.
Bye.
So I'm glad that we were able to figure that out.
Yeah.
Thank God. What were we talking about?
the difference between the imitators and the innovators. So, the imitators are always going to be a dime a dozen, a dime a dozen, and they're always going to be in waves of about 10 to 20,
Right.
at least within the on the music industry side. So you've got all of these people who are imitating each other because of one innovator. So for each innovator, you always have 10 to 20 imitators. And that is where it gets into a tricky subject within the art aspect of that dichotomy, basically, because you will always have that person who is a complete innovator to what they do, and you're always going to have those 10 to 20 imitators. And I want to use the 90s as my perfect example of this, because once all of the top guns of Marvel left to become Image Comics, what did Marvel and DC do? They hired a bunch of people to imitate their style to sell their books, because that was the only way that they can make up money, because that style obviously dictated an era. And so they did that. And so Image was just like, well, this has been going on for so long, we're going to be hiring more people to be under us. So this is where we get David Finch, this is where we get Travis Charest, this is where we get J. Scott Campbell. The list goes on. And so that set a whole new bar and standard in terms of the evolution of style, basically.
Right.
Now, on same similar aspects, when Joe Madureira was doing stuff for X-Men during the Age of Apocalypse and of course Uncanny X-Men, after he left to go work and do stuff with what's the name of that Image subprint, Cliffhanger, because that's when he did Battle Chasers. And of course Humberto Ramos was in the same boat as well. So after those guys left, and of course how well those books that they did were selling, that left a giant hole. What did they do? Well, they hired a bunch of people to basically imitate those styles. And it was just, again, as you can obviously tell, it was just people that were being hired to ape another person's style. So you had, 10 to 20 imitators pushing out those books. And so you saw like a specific pattern that was happening within that. And of course, which I will say in terms of like, the original Image guys, McFarlane, Lee, Liefeld, Batarcio, Scott Williams, because his inking style obviously attributed a lot into that. When you have all those guys setting a set standard in terms of being innovators for their style for that time, and then everyone's trying to imitate it, I'm going to have to make a joke out of this, but I think the last thing a person should do would be imitating Rob Liefeld. Which is why I hate the fact that I did not know this, but of course, after Liefeld had left, I had no idea that Mike Mignola did X-Force.
What?
And Mike Mignola did X-Force sometime after. Yeah, after Liefeld left, and he only did a couple of issues, but there were people hating on him because it wasn't the style. It's Mike Mignola. He does his own thing, and of course, I mean, he did stuff with DC as well, because I know that he did a couple of Superman comics. I know he did a Batman comic, and so.
But people were hating on him then about that because his style didn't work with that character.
Or that team, exactly.
That team, yeah.
The thing is that like, sure, it was a different take, but it's just like you guys are bashing on Mignola.
Well, I think
it's their thing. And then what makes it interesting is that it's because of that thing that he ends up making Hellboy.
Right.
Which then spawns all of the people who have been influenced or imitating his style for a time, which I think it takes a certain kind of person to want to imitate Mignola.
Well, I think it does too. And you've hinted a lot about a lot of people, because you're right. A lot of people in the industry, depending on how the time is going, will be imitations. And Mignola, you can say that he wasn't an imitation when he started, but Mignola had to become Mignola, what we know now for Hellboy. Yep. So basically what he learned is that, I like this certain style. Let me because almost Mignola, he's like deconstructing Kirby and making it more cubist almost. And
I would say he took equal parts Kirby and equal parts Alex Toth.
Yeah, I could see that too. Yeah.
And then that's his DNA, which ends up getting funneled into what he is today. But I will say though, when you really kind of boil down to it, again, he is influenced and inspired by those guys, but he is an innovator.
Well, I mean,
what he does.
He is, but I would even say too, if you look at Bill Sienkiewicz, when Sienkiewicz started, he was an imitation of Neil Adams. Like if you look at a Sienkiewicz and a Neil Adams, like how they drew, that you could almost virtually not tell them apart. But Sienkiewicz eventually found his own way, and like now when you look at a lot of the stuff that he's done, especially like the Electra run that he did, and like a lot of the covers that he does, he's more artistic about it and he's more painterly with it. Especially like I've watched him draw, and like it's amazing to sit there and like watch him like bust this piece out, and like the tools that he's using. I mean, to me he's become more of like a fine artist with how he does stuff now. He's more painterly, which is great to see. And I mean, I can't say anything because like when I started out, I really liked Darwin Cook, so like my style leaned more towards Darwin. But I think my style doesn't look like that now. I mean, it may some way have some semblance of that, but it's not how it is now. Because I've always viewed it as that when you start out, when you draw what you like.
Yeah.
And then that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to draw what you like, and then you're supposed to build upon that foundation and learn all the way up until eventually you just develop your own style. And that's going to come about by drawing and by trying out different tools.
Yeah. Which leads into something that I've probably mentioned every other video, is that when it comes to finding your own style, to get from the point of the mindset of, okay, these are the things that inspire me to do this, and then here comes the end product, looking at inspiration and influence as the launch pad, not the rocket itself.
Right.
Because within the launch pad, everything else that becomes the building blocks of the rocket, it's not going to be the same as those people that you are influenced by. And which is, you can also look at it in terms of like, cooking, or, it takes so many ingredients to make a stew. And of course, depending on the temperature that you put it at and blah, 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 and all those other metaphors and analogies that we can come up with. But I used to rocket ship one, not just because, Huntsville is to Rocket City, and there's a bunch of engineers that like watching the show apparently, but it's definitely one of those things where you really do have to think about it as the launch pad, and it cannot be the rocket itself, because when you start making it into the rocket itself, you get into that realm of, well, you're just an imitator. And it's not even imposter syndrome anymore. It really is. You're really becoming a one-for-one imitator. And I see a lot of that exists on social media, where you've got these people who will do these. And you probably have seen these posts as well, where they will put up this. It's all these people that are aping a specific anime character in the exact style of said artist. And of course, they've got all of the color pencils arranged in a certain way, or the markers, paints, whatever. And it looks like a photo cell reproduction.
Right.
Basically. And so it's just like, well, that's a really good one-for-one, line for line imitation, basically. But what else can you do? And that's where you've got, these people that are absolutely stumped when it comes to that, because now we start getting into the realms of like imitation, which then leads into emulation, which is just imitation times 2 or cubed, or whatever mathematical equation, which then now leads into a subject that I was really hoping that I wish I could bypass, but I do feel like it kind of needs to be touched about, which is the bane of AI image generators.
Well, you kind of already touched on that too. Their AI is nothing more than those people that reproduce the perfect cell art of a certain character. That's all that it is. I think AI can be a tool as a jumping off point, but otherwise than that, you need to kind of like take from that and like use your imagination up here, because the more we depend on AI to do everything, it takes jobs away from artists, and like you're just getting generic shit.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that, I mean, a studio and a publisher, depending on who they are, if it's always about the bottom line, they're going to do the cheapest option possible. And it's terrible, but that's how capitalism works. They're going to try to get away with the cheapest option possible and try not to pay an artist. And I mean, I've seen that happen. You've seen it happen. We see it happening now. I mean, Jesus Christ, with the writers' strike and everything that's going on with SAG. I mean,
Oh, it's evolved now that the visual effects departments are also joining into it.
Well, they need to, and the actors need to join into it too, because I mean, it's stupid that we're letting money drive creativity, and we're letting the bottom dollar. And the thing is, those studio heads make millions of dollars every year. I don't care what they say. Some of the films they even like trashed, like the Batman film that we never even got to see, or the Batgirl film. I mean, So I mean, they can waste that money. They can pay the writer and the artist the residuals that they need to live off of. I mean, they're not living in mega mansions. These assholes that run these studios are living in like mega mansions in California.
There are some actors who did at one point live in these places out in like Key West or whatever, but the problem is that they ended up having to sell those homes due to either tax evasion or they were just covering up their costs because they weren't getting the jobs that they used to at the time for multiples of reasons. But I would look at the whole situation of AI differently if it wasn't built on tech bros that are trying to find yet another reason to steal, another reason to exploit, another reason to do things without the consent of companies or creatives, without the compensation towards these people, nor the transparency of the fact of they are doing this. And I know I've talked to you about this ad nauseum, but the amount of people that are super misinformed because they're only focusing on whatever news report that just happens to fly up there, and they see the clickbait title and they don't read anything past it, or they don't actually do the due diligence of searching as to why this should be good or why this should be bad. It's partly because of that, but people are just not doing due diligence of whatever. And it really gets into that whole situation of, like I said, you've got all these tech bros that are just trying to find another way to grift, another way to keep making that avenue flowing, which, and I've seen this video circulate, and it is a perfect example, despite the fact that it could be looked at as a joke, but there is a big giant grain of truth into it. And it's that scene where Jeff Goldblum is talking to is it Richard Attenborough in Jurassic Park?
Yeah. Richard something.
Yeah. I can't remember the guy's last name, but he's basically talking about just you made a technological advance. Great on you. But you didn't think about the ethics of it. You didn't think about the human intelligence that is common sense. You just saw the dollar bills that you can reap out of it, and damn the consequences of it. And that's the biggest problem, which, something that us as visual artists saw in advance with the whole NFT fiasco.
Yeah.
Which, gosh, the amount of arguments that I got swept into regarding it, which that whole situation was a scheme all on its own, when you've got people trying to embed a blockchain code into a picture of the Mona Lisa on the Louvre's West. Is either the Louvre or if it was the Smithsonian, but it was one, and they were trying to sell money a variation of a currency, which is probably more accurate. And they were just reaping in that stock. And then when people are just like, well, I don't want it, can I get a refund back? And realize, oh, you can't. And so it just, the whole situation of it was so dumb. And then of course you got the environmental aspect, because so much energy was getting poured into these server farms with this whole, it wasn't even day trading. I mean, it was practically just, let's pull a version of the pyramid scheme basically by doing this.
Well, that's all MTFs were.
Yeah, it really was. It was a variation of it. And within this, they're basically causing these server farms to overheat, which these aren't, it's, if you've ever walked into an AMC and you see this one room with a couple of servers in it that look like giant refrigerators, imagine an entire warehouse full of these, and that warehouse getting into temperatures well above 95 degrees.
That's nuts.
It is nuts. And which whenever you have like the ATF, whenever they do those like flybys with helicopters with the thermal scanners to see if there's like pot farmers growing or whatever,
right?
They've got so anyways, they're doing the same thing, and they realize, and then of course also utility workers noticing that there's like giant power surgings happening. It's because these people are doing the whole NFT thing. Well, that energy has to go somewhere, so that heat is going to be expended, and which, if you don't think it becomes a climate issue, it does, because all that energy.
Here you're talking about crypto mining.
Yeah, and so all that energy and heat gets up, expending. Now,
right,
on the same aspects, with just grifters got to grift. All of these, tech bros that are using these image generators are all working off of the same program, which is known as Stable Diffusion. And what it does is that it scrapes data, regardless if it's been protected or not, regardless if, it's public data, private data, whatever. It's going to scrape it with or without your consent. It's going to do it anyways, because it's going to opt you basically into it without you telling you.
Right.
So it becomes a whole terms of service infraction, which is something that the older I've gotten, the more I read. It becomes lengthy, but you got to read into it.
Well, I mean, you do, and you've mentioned a lot of it too. The biggest thing it boils down to is those guys that are skimming the internet for anything that they can try to sell for a buck.
Yeah.
It's the same guys that we deal with when we go to convention that have the giant walls of like posters of like this single anime character or a certain character in like a sexy pose or whatnot that they didn't do that someone else did. And that's what they're trying to sell for like $5. Yeah. And the thing is that hurts us in a way, because they're selling artwork that they have no ability to do. They can't reproduce it, so they steal it, then they sell it, and then it just hurts the artist in the long run.
Yeah.
So, and I mean, it's the same thing that the crypto guys are doing anyway, or I just wouldn't say that, but I don't know. I'm just glad NTFs are dead, because there were several people that try to get you, they try to get me, and to come in and do it. Yeah. And then I was like, I have no desire to draw any type of monkey or anything doing whatever, because like it never made any sense, and it doesn't. And I mean,
it looked like if Andy Warhol was trying his best while completely stoned on MS Paint.
Yeah,
that's what those icons look like, and it made
a lot of them were like that. I mean, Thomas, look at the shirt you have on now.
Oh yeah, I know.
The Frankenstein. I mean, completely.
Now, here's the thing, though. It does states Universal and all of the copyrights that they had to go through, and but that again, that gets into the whole situation of there's no transparency whenever people are using these programs. There's no compensation and there is no consent, and that's why you've got people like Carlo Ortiz and John Lamb and several others who have been. They basically put their finger on the pulse when this stuff was starting to happen. Within a year, and have been following it ever since. In which there is a program called Glaze, which apparently you're able to protect your artwork from being scraped to use for data. And of course, if you want to know if your stuff has ever been used to train AI, there is a website called Have I Been Trained? I believe that's what it's called, which you can find that link on either John Lamb's or Carlo Ortiz's social media. But like, they're literally out there almost every day on Capitol Hill having to fight this thing to get actual legislation to really hunker down, because this stuff really does need to be controlled, unfortunately, at a government level, because that human intelligence, that common sense factor has not reached it. Because right now it's gone to a point where you've got high school kids using this stuff as revenge porn because their ex-girlfriend wouldn't, open their legs for them. Like, it has happened. Don't think that it's an episode of Black Mirror. Like, this is actual things that have happened. For a fact that there's going to be a sex offender that's going to use it. For a fact
that's already happening.
Yeah, for a fact for a fact that there's going to be someone from a political party that's going to use it to deep fake another political person that they're opposing to say or do something that they didn't do. Well, if that person ends up in jail for something that they didn't do, well, then where is the real evidence that, it becomes a whole quagmire of problems. And what really makes it bad is the fact of, for starters, it makes zero sense that visual arts, especially in comics, have no copyright type companies working for them like ASCAP or BMI to protect IP, to protect themselves. The only thing that they have that protects them, so to speak, is whenever their stuff actually does get published. Because if you look at on the inside of any comic book or graphic novel or manga, you'll see an entire blurb of copyright, trademarks, publication dates, so on and so forth. That's really the only thing that kind of protects them.
Well, I know for regular novels and graphic novels that are made, you get an ISBN number, and then you get a number that's registered with the Library of Congress.
Yeah.
So,
even then, it's just like, the thing is that if you look in the music industry, and if someone takes anything that's remotely close to whatever it is that you have already put out that has been protected by either ASCAP or BMI, you can sue them for millions upon millions of dollars. And that has happened with the whole situation with Joe Satriani versus Coldplay, which Satriani won. That happened, lawsuit that had happened to Avril Lavigne, that had happened to Ashley Simpson. Of course, it goes back even further when Vanilla Ice took the Under Pressure that Queen did. That became a legal quagmire. It goes back even further to, and this is truth, there have been, during the 50s and 60s, you had all these record companies that were basically just full of white guys that were stealing music that were done by black artists and then redone and then sold to the white audience.
Yeah. That's
so
how it's got to start.
Yeah. And so, don't think that this is something that's only been happening within the last 10 years. This has been happening for decades for the music industry. And that's why they have been pushing so hard as far as just the copyright situation. And I hate the fact that on the visual art side of it all, there isn't that same kind of protection, that same kind of legal binding to help that kind of situation. And which is,
I think like you said, that we're getting there. We're getting there with activism, and we're getting there with people that are putting their foot down. But the biggest thing is like you said, getting people that are higher up in Congress to actually make a law. And our government is very slow at doing anything. We look at social media and whatnot. I mean, they're very out of touch, and they've never known how to regulate this to begin with. They're not going to know how to regulate art to begin with either, because the thing is that so much of art, like music, is subjective. So
Yeah.
much of what we have is like it's absorbed from what we listen to or what we read, and then we blurb it back out. So I don't know. It's definitely like we have to be careful about it so that we're not infringing on people's right to be creative. But we
Yeah.
definitely don't. But we definitely want to get the people that are hurting artists and taking money away from them.
Yeah. So here's the thing though, when you're using this, and this being any AI image generator, and I'm stating it as a image generator, it's collaging stuff together that has been stolen to create,
Right.
to put out something else. It's really not even creating it. In order for something to have any sort of creation, in the reference and definition of what makes art is that there actually does have to be the human elements of one's soul and emotions actually being put into something to create. There's discipline, there is craft, there's the knowledge of knowing when a person should be using chiaroscuro or atmospheric perspective to create their piece. There has to be knowledge of understanding how color theory works. A program doesn't know this. It never will, unless people are just so willing to create a whole dystopian universe where it does. And then where does that leave humanity? So,
You can't copyright.
so
That's the thing too, is that you can't copyright it. So anything that they've done that has been generated by a machine, it can't be copyrighted. Like anything that's come out of Midjourney, it can't be copyrighted. It can't be, because it's never technically been created. It's been mashed together, which is technically not creation.
no, it's
It's an
pixel bashing is what I want to call it. But then now you've entered a situation where literally AI is literally stuck on its own things that it's been putting out. So it's literally stuck in a loop,
exactly
as it were. So again, this is a topic that can go on and on and on and on. But I think when it kind of really boils down to it, with it being a blaringly elephant in the room, any creative that is worth their salt is going to see the harm that this stuff has been doing and has been doing for months on end. And it is affecting not just the artists, it's affecting the writers, because there are programs that actually steal stuff from writers. It's affecting the visual effects department, because again, there's zero reason why billionaires should be doing half the crap that they're doing in the first place, but yet here they are. So sidestep away from that. Now we're getting into, I guess, the last and final thing to, I guess, encapsulate everything and bookend it, is where does this leave us as creatives in the industry? And by industry, I mean specifically the comic industry. Where does all this stuff, as far as inspiration and influence and ways to use them so we're not being the next imitator, where does that leave us in the industry? Where does that leave you for where you want to go within the industry?
I'd say the biggest thing is just keep drawing, because the thing is that like the computer is going to do what it's going to do. There's going to be somebody behind it. They're going to do what they're going to do. They're going to try to get a job in comics and realize that it's much harder than they think that it is, because to do comics is incredibly hard. And the only way to get better at it is to make a comic, try to publish it, get it published, and then do another one. Because every time you do it, it's completely different. The people you're working with, the publisher you're working with is going to be different, and you'll get better each time that you do it. The biggest thing is you just sit down and draw. You try a bunch of different techniques. You try a different bunch of tools. And you kind of do it that way. I mean, I really wouldn't worry so much about AI and like Midjourney. It will eventually, it'll still always be there, but it'll eventually be replaced by something else that's probably far worse. I don't know what that could possibly be, but who knows, because we're living in
Skynet.
yeah. I mean, we're really, I mean, so much of Black Mirror and even so much of science fiction's like coming true slowly that we're kind of outpacing like science fiction almost in a way. Every day it gets a little bit more real
Yeah.
with it. So I don't know. That was weird. So I guess I.
Accidentally touched the something on my mouse.
Oh, okay. I was like, so it was like the show was turned over to me. But no, I don't know. But you going back about imitation. Here's my thing about that. When you start out as an artist, you're gonna imitate somebody, which is fine. But the biggest thing is don't make that your shtick. You know, learn from what that artist has done. Find another artist, learn what they've done, and then take that and like kind of like mesh it together and make your own thing from it. Because like that's what everybody's doing.
Yeah.
Take a little bit of this, a little bit of that. Because no one wants to go to an editor and be told, you know, oh, you look too much like Michael Golden, you know, or something like that, or you look like Frank Miller too much. And I don't mean like when Frank Miller started, I mean where Frank Miller's at now,
right,
in his artistic career. So right. I don't know. It's like take what you like.
I don't think Frank Miller wants to be Frank Miller anymore. If we're being honest,
I don't know. Like I don't know. I kind of wish he would go back to how he was with his drawing. Like, and I'm talking like
the Daredevil.
The Daredevil run, and probably like even like where he was doing like the Dark Knight Returns.
Okay.
Like because he was kind of doing a little bit of that sketchy stuff there, but he wasn't quite where it went to, like in Sin City and like where he's at now.
Yeah.
Even he went kind of cubist in a little bit of a way and really sketchy.
Yeah.
And the thing is too, in this new generation that we're seeing, like I love Daniel Warren Johnson, I love James Herron too. But the thing is that I don't want to be Daniel Warren Johnson and James Herron. I want to be Reed Beeman. So like the thing is like take what you like from them and then like try to make your own thing, because that's the really good thing about comics is that it's very kind of subjective, but it's also like you could go 1,000 different directions in this. You could be like Sean Phillips and Ed Brubaker. You could find a niche in doing criminal comics. You could find a niche doing like really outlandish science fiction. I mean, you never really know because it's really going to depend on like what people like. And the biggest thing is the whole point is too is like don't be an asshole. Like be a nice person, because there's so many people in this industry that like it's a very small community. People know everybody.
Yeah.
Try not to talk mad shit about anybody and be nice, because word will get around. And if you're a pretentious prick, like no one's going to want to work with you.
Yeah. There's definitely something to be said, because I've probably have heard more horror stories from other creatives in the industry, regardless if they've been published 1,000 times or only been published 10 times. And that's everything from interiors to cover artists. Word gets around.
Yeah.
As far as anything that you happen to say or do. So, you know, if you're doing stuff that is considered very skeevy, just being just an absolute dick, they're going to know. Don't think that they're not. Yeah. So, just so we're getting into the PG-13 realm of this thing. But that really is a very good encapsulation, which is, when you are starting off doing comics, yes, you are going to be some ways aping the things that you are influenced and inspired by. It's definitely a given, which, again, like you said, start melding in other things, experiment, see where it takes you. If it doesn't work, find another thing that will mesh in well. Because, I mean, as I said earlier, there's more than one way to skin a cat, just as there's more than one way to do comics in terms of how to visually tell a story, not how to do the same cover 1,000 ways.
Yeah.
Because that's not comics. That is a facet of it, but that's not visual storytelling. If you want different ways of trying to figure out, like if you're stuck in a rut and you want to figure out how to get out of it, read something that you normally would not be reading in the first place, comic wise. So like if you're stuck in 90s image world, get out of that. Read something from Daniel Warren Johnson or James Herron. Read something, read Black Sad.
Or even read manga. Like read something that's not even American.
Yeah.
Like branch out.
Yeah. Definitely do that. Definitely get out of that zone. Or if you feel like, you know, all your influences stuff are things that have happened within the last 20 years and you feel stuck, go back to the golden age. Read some of the stuff that Lee did with Kirby and Bashima, and even the Joe Cooper stuff with Sergeant Fury. Wait, what's that, Sergeant Fury?
You're talking about Sergeant Rock from the
Sergeant
70s?
Rock.
Yeah.
That's it. Yeah. They both happen around the same time period.
Yeah, I mean, really, if you go, I think Joe Kubert's a really good person to go look at for like the breadth of like just what he was able to do and like how he was able to draw. I mean, you can learn a lot of pacing from him. You can learn a lot because I leaned a lot really heavy into him part of the time for when I did the Stretcher Bearers.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, you know, it's fine to do that. But like you said, Thomas, you know, if you're stuck in a rut, go out and read. If you don't have the money, go to the library, because it's amazing now the comic sections are in a lot of your local libraries now, because like a lot of librarians are realizing that comics is the way a lot of kids read now through comics. And if you want to get into comics too, you don't always have to go to the big two. If it works out that you go to the big two, good job. You've made it to the big two. But you know what? You can have a complete career where you only work with Dark Horse or Oni or Image, or maybe you work with a French publisher. I mean, we have so much more access and availability now that it's more prevalent. And if you want to do Kickstarter, you can do Kickstarter. The only advice I can give you for that is get an editor.
There's definitely that. I think there are two big reasons as to why Kickstarter comics sometimes don't work for people. Part of that, is basically the advertising side of it all.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, you could literally post, share, bug your parents, what have you, every day for like a year straight and not make a goal. And then on the opposite side of it, it's part of it is just like, I hate to say it, but sometimes either the story might not be the thing that's appealing, or even the art, or both.
Right.
It's just not the thing that's really appealing to want to have a person to back it. Because there was notice that someone had mentioned something. It's just like one of the big things when it comes to their wanting to back a comic out of the blue, they do not know the creative team, is the fact of, if you can't tell me what genre it is, I'm probably not going to be able to back it. If you're not going to at least post some of the interiors, showing that there actually is some footing and progress to this, I'm probably not going to back it. If you're not going to have a decent enough synopsis, but yet don't spoil the entire story, but don't add in a bunch of stuff that is inconsequential, chances are they're not going to back it. So, I mean, there's a lot of fine line medium, and I'm pretty sure that's like a whole other topic and video that we can definitely get into, not just with you, but also with guys like Jonathan Hedrick, who has just been killing it with just every Kickstarter thing that he's been doing time and time and again, for sure. It's also interesting to see people who have been in the big two industry for the last 20, 30 years that are just like, I'm done with it, we're going Kickstarter. Jimmy Palmiotti and Amanda Connor, they've been doing it pretty hard as far as doing it with the Kickstarter round for probably the last 3 to 5 years, I think.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's definitely interesting to see. The status quos are definitely changing creatives are definitely being a little bit more gung-ho about their IP. They're definitely wanting to change the landscape as far as where we can go with comics and how we can do them.
Oh yeah.
If you want to do it all traditionally, great. If you want to do it all through Procreate, Clip Studio, Photoshop, great. But the moment that you start stealing from other people and painting it over, we know.
Yeah.
Don't think that we know, but we know.
That is true. Well, I think the biggest thing is too, Thomas, like, is this could devolve into like a whole other podcast too, but just talking like just trying to make a living wage being a comic book artist. And like so much of that's like been in the media recently because of like some pretty like the deaths that have just happened in the comic book industry, and just some people like who were like not really that old that have died. And we could probably do a post to another special about that, because that's its whole another beast in its own. But the bottom line, it goes back to also, is that in this industry, with it being as hard, no publisher is going to take care of you. You've got to like be there for yourself. It's literally a lot of times like the Wild West with it, that like, you kind of live by the gun in a way, and that's how you get your bread and butter. And at the end of the day, there's not always a stable you can go home to.
Yeah.
So,
wandering swordsman.
pretty much. But I mean, it's not. It sounds bad, but it's not all bad. It's just like coming to reality with stuff, and just like being able to realize that your own mental health and your physical body is really important, and you don't want to turn around and just die at your drawing table. A lot of artists have. But I would like to not do that.
Yeah.
I'd like to have a life and have a family, and be able to do what I want to do. But it just, I don't know. It takes a lot of sacrifice to do what we do.
Most definitely. Before I close everything down, Reed, since you obviously have been here before, as far as just with lines on the page, and great. This was like back when? February, I think?
Something like that.
January, February, somewhere around there. I'm going to go ahead and type this into the chat, but what is your username handle so that people can find you on social media?
If you look up Reed Beeman Art, just Reed Beeman Art, or even just like look up like Reed Beeman, like it'll pull up. I'm only on like Instagram and like Facebook now. I don't have Twitter or X or whatever it's called.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
You can find me there, and when I guess if I ever get on Blue Sky, or I don't know, I tried Mastodon, didn't really work. But
do you have an invite to Blue Sky?
I haven't gotten one yet.
Okay, I think I may have gotten one because I've been on there for like over 2 weeks. So let me check to see if I do have an invite. If I do have one, I'll definitely shoot one your way.
Cool. Much appreciated.
Yeah. It definitely works a lot differently than like say, Instagram or Twitter or whatever. I do like Threads. The Twitter as offshoot of Instagram. I actually do like Threads. However, I will say, when you do first start off, you will have to like either it will try to the algorithm that is will try to like post a bunch of people that you're not following as far as just in your feed. So you will have to either like mute and or block, which will then decide even more. And of course, whatever that you're liking will also affect your algorithm in terms of the things that you will repeatedly see.
Right.
But if you have an Instagram account, obviously those who also happen to have a Threads account will automatically link together. So you will get that meshing in. So like, say, I don't know, Steven Segovia or Chris Sandy or whoever that's also on Threads. If you're following him on Instagram, you'll see him on Threads, and then, yeah.
Right.
So I like that. I like that cohesion that's been happening there. But yeah, I will definitely check my Blue Sky account to see if I've got an invite code, and I will shoot that one your way for sure.
Cool. I did want to mention too about the project that me and you have been working on, because we mentioned that the last podcast. So we finished.
Yes.
Yeah, we finished. So we so
mostly
you go
on
back,
me.
yeah. Well, it takes time for
Yeah.
perfection. So the thing is that Thomas and I, we have already at the current for our comic, the title that we're calling it is Lilywood for right now. So we've been able to get the samples off to a publisher. I'm not going to drop names here, but it's being looked at. So hopefully the next time or sometime soon we can post more about it. But I just want to, there you go, Thomas. So
There
yes, you can see a sample of what the cover would look like there.
Yeah.
So basically, we're still kind of waiting to hear back. Hopefully, things will work out soon, but we'll keep everyone posted. So it's just one of the natures of comics. It just takes time. But I just want people to know that we have been working, and that's why I've been like quiet on Instagram and stuff like that, because I doing a lot behind the scenes that you may not see, and like social media is like kind of at the bottom of my list of things a lot of the day.
Unfortunately, it's kind of been at the top of my list. I don't want it to be, but I think I annoy you half the time with some of the real sets.
No, you don't. No, we no, some of the stuff you send me is like funny. It's just a lot of times just like if I'm busy or I'm doing stuff, like I'll try to just like see it later.
Yeah.
Like, and so
I know when
work-life balance type thing.
I know whenever Alan like sends me stuff, I'm just like, I'll never actually get to watch it, just because I end up getting busy, or the last thing I need is, oh God, what did he send me? Do I need to put on my headphones or what? So some of those reels end up getting a little bit questionable at times, for sure.
Yeah, well, that's like some of the stuff I send you. I'm like, I try not to send it to you till like later in the day, because I'm like, you would be home by then and you wouldn't be in the shop. So, because you don't want like, because I know you play music in the shop, but you don't want like one of the reels to show up like over the Bluetooth in the shop.
So I actually, this year I kind of stopped playing music in the shop and ended up just putting on whatever streaming thing. This week I've actually been playing the One Piece live action.
Oh, okay.
So I've been playing that the past 3 days, and I probably will do that tomorrow while I'm there. I don't know, might depend. I did play originally the Justice League Unlimited, because I had that on, and of course on Prime they've been uploading a lot of the DC movies for some reason. So the original sorry, not the original Wonder Woman, but the first Wonder Woman film, play that. The Batman trilogy is on Netflix. I've been playing that, the Christopher Nolan trilogy, that is. So yeah, it's I try to change it up as much as I possibly can, depending on which streaming service is not crapping out through Fire Stick. So yeah, there's definitely that. So Reed, thank you again.
Sorry for being late again. But
no, it's totally fine. Yeah, it's helping out doggies everywhere in the world.
Yeah, I mean it's bad. It's bad here in our area just because like the shelters are like really overrun. And I think that's just like a lot of problems that people are having, and then their dogs are getting out. But at least that this dog was microchipped, so that hopefully will have a happy ending. But hopefully they can pay the vet bill. So
they should definitely reimburse you for that.
I don't pay for it. It goes to the Homeward Bound Rescue that we work with out of Columbia, South Carolina. They're really good about it. We actually have another foster dog here that's with us through Homeward Bound that's looking for adoption. Her name's Maggie. So all I can tell you is that people that have dogs, please microchip your dog and take very good care of your dog. And if you know if a dog is being abused, take it away from that asshole. Yeah.
Knowing is half the battle.
For real. For real.
Speaking of things that I'm doing, I know I mentioned this at the very beginning of the video, but starting on September 25th, I am dropping the prompt for Requiem and Reverie. It's going to be 31 days of gothic and dark fantasy sketches. If you have done any of my previous prompts that I've done this year, basically what I do is that I pick out a theme. Now, the difference is that this is all original artwork. There is no fan art whatsoever. There is no licensed trademark characters that I'm doing. It's all original artwork. It has its own story. I will be posting a video about this tomorrow, actually, also explaining a bit of it. If you want to know more about this, I did put up a wordy post not even a day or so ago. So please go to my social media to learn more information about that. But like I said, the difference is this time, like I said, it is all original artwork. It's going to be a different piece each day for 31 days. So every day of October. And then on top of that, instead of being like, 2 or 3 days of people basically claiming their dibs on which piece that they want, I'm actually extending it to a week just because I know that there's going to be that one person who didn't see it until things actually start the ball rolling. So I at least want to give people an entire week to figure out if they are wanting a piece or not. So there will be your chance to actually get 1 or 3 or all 31, which I would be extremely thankful for that, for sure. I don't expect that to happen. I'm at least smart enough to know at least that part. So
you never know, man. You never know.
Yeah, you never know. There could be that. Maybe if a billionaire was actually supportive of creatives, get some of that money.
One can dream. One can dream.
It's crazy because creatives are struggling, but yet at one point in time, commissioning an artist, regardless if they were a painter or a sculptor, woodworker, whatever, like that was when that person had money, and they were spinning it, and they were spinning it correctly because they knew the craft, they knew the time, they knew the resources that were going to go into it. It's just like, here's a blank check, go crazy. And so, that's where we get pieces like, the Sistine Chapel and David and unfortunately what was the Tower of Alexandria, which kind of makes me wonder what scrolls and books were in that place before it got burned to the ground. But anyways, aside from that and the fall of the Roman Empire, you can find Haven Comics at 1871 Slaughter Road, Suite F in Madison, Alabama, which our store hours are typically between 12 to 6, Wednesday through Saturday, and we are also open on Sundays from 12 to 5. And if you happen to like the show and any other show that we happen to do at Haven Comics, please remember to like and subscribe, click that bell icon, share the videos. That also helps. Commenting while we're going live also helps. We're not just saying that just to say that. It actually does bring in other people to watch. And of course, don't freak out if you happen to miss a show. They will get uploaded, if not on our own prospective Facebook pages, but also on the Haven Comics YouTube page as well, which if you are not following the Haven Comics YouTube page, why aren't you? And if you want to know where you can find me on social media, you can find me through at tpriceartworks. Where you can find me on basically almost every major social media platform, and also on Patreon, which if you want to figure out any of the interior art, and also uploaded the full color versions of said things on Patreon. Yes, it is unfortunately against the paywall, but that is just because we're trying to keep this thing as close in as possible with the few people that we have shared it to. So if you want to see it, it is there. So definitely check that out. Reed, thank you again. And everyone, I hope you have a great start of your Saturday, beginning of Sunday, whenever it is that you watch this. I don't know. I'm not smart. I don't have a doctor.
Today is the first day of fall. So
September 1st was the first day of fall. We're just claiming that right then and there. It is Halloween. It is Halloween Eve, starting September 1st. All right. Thank you guys so much. And we will see you back in action whenever I just happen to be back on in October. But definitely be sure to catch Josh and Alan on Shop Talk on Thursdays. See you then.